Listen closely because the story I'm about to tell you breaks every rule of the streets and rewrites every law of loyalty. People walk past the homeless every single day. They look right through them, invisible stains on the concrete, ghosts haunting the edges of a world that pretends they don't exist. But what happens when an invisible boy stands up to protect a girl whose father runs the most dangerous motorcycle club in California? You get blood on the asphalt. You get broken bones and shattered pride. And you get a debt so profound that it changes everything. This isn't a fairy tale about a knight in shining armor. This is the raw, unfiltered, true story of a 16-year-old boy who took a savage beating to save a Hell's Angel's daughter. How that club repaid him will leave you absolutely speechless. Bakersfield, California sits in the southern San Joaquin Valley like a forgotten promise. The heat here doesn't just make you sweat, it presses down on your shoulders. Heavy, oppressive, mixing with the smell of diesel exhaust dust from the agricultural fields and the particular metallic tang of a city that's seen better days. For 16-year-old Silas Kane, that heat was just another blanket in a life already suffocating with invisibility. Silas was a ghost long before anyone called him that, a runaway from a broken foster care system that had chewed him up and spit him out 2 years prior. He spent his days navigating the narrow alleys behind the Oildale strip malls, his nights curled up in the rusted shell of a 1990 Ford Bronco at the edge of the Southern Pacific rail yards. The Bronco had been his home for 8 months. Before that, steam grates. Before that, abandoned buildings. Before that, nightmares he tried desperately not to remember. The boy was scrawny, ribs pressing against his faded gray t-shirt like prison bars. He had a mop of unruly brown hair that constantly fell into his eyes. Eyes that were sharp, observant, far too old for a teenager. When you live on the streets, your survival depends entirely on your ability to read the environment. You learn the heavy, aggressive footsteps of a bored cop looking for someone to hassle. You learn the frantic, erratic pacing of an addict coming down hard. You learn the arrogant, entitled swagger of rich kids who think the world is a playground built specifically for their amusement. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October, the kind of day where the temperature hit 90 degrees by noon and showed no mercy. Silas was sitting on a cracked concrete bench near the perimeter fence of North High School. He wasn't there to creep on students or cause trouble. He was there because the dumpster behind the cafeteria was usually a gold mine. Unopened granola bars, half-eaten sandwiches discarded by kids who had never known real hunger, who had never felt their stomach eat itself from the inside out. He had a battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo resting on his knees. Salvaged from a little free library box 3 weeks prior, the pages were dog-eared and stained, but the story was intact. Silas loved that book. Loved the idea that a man could be crushed by the world, thrown into the darkest pit imaginable, and still claw his way back to justice, still find a way to matter. But his eyes weren't on the pages. They were focused on the student parking lot. That's where he first noticed her. To anyone else, Quinn Reeves was just another high school sophomore. She wore ripped blue jeans, black Converse sneakers, and a plain white tank top. Dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. Nothing that screamed for attention. But Silas, with his street-sharpened instincts, saw the contradictions immediately. She didn't walk with the carefree lightness of the other girls streaming out of the building. Her posture was guarded, shoulders slightly squared, chin tucked down, eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. And then there was the jacket. Even in the 90-degree heat, she carried a heavy worn black leather jacket draped over her arm. It wasn't fashion store leather. It was thick, scarred, the kind of leather that smelled of motor oil and highway wind and 1,000 miles of open road. Silas noticed the subtle silver skull pin on the collar. He didn't know the exact meaning, but he knew enough. Knew that insignia meant she was connected to something heavy, something dangerous, the local motorcycle underworld. Quinn was trying desperately to blend in, trying to be invisible in her own way, but she had caught the attention of exactly the wrong crowd. Trent Ashford drove a brand new lifted white Chevy Silverado that his father, a prominent real estate developer, had bought him for his 16th birthday. The truck was immaculate, chrome gleaming, custom rims, the kind of vehicle that announced wealth and privilege from 3 blocks away. Trent was tall, athletic, and possessed a cruel, calculating smile. He was the king of North High by sheer financial force, not through talent, not through kindness, just money. He surrounded himself with a sycophantic crew, most notably a thick-necked enforcer named Colton Mercer. Colton was built like a linebacker, all muscle and barely contained aggression. A varsity quarterback with a full-ride scholarship to a state university already lined up. The kind of boy who had learned early that his size gave him power over smaller people, and he used that power without hesitation. For weeks now, Silas had watched from his bench as Trent tried to corner Quinn. It had started as arrogant flirting. Trent assumed a girl like Quinn, quiet and solitary, would be thrilled to receive attention from the school's golden boy. But Quinn had ignored him completely. When ignoring didn't work, she had told him in no uncertain terms to back off, leave her alone, find someone else to harass. Silas had seen the flash of genuine anger cross Trent's face that day, the color rising in his cheeks, the tightness around his eyes. In Trent's world, the word no was a foreign language, an insult, a challenge to his authority. On this particular Tuesday, the tension finally snapped. The final bell rang, vomiting a stream of teenagers out into the blinding afternoon sun. Silas watched as Quinn adjusted the strap of her backpack, put her head down, and started walking quickly away from the main thoroughfare. She was taking a shortcut, a narrow shadowed alleyway that ran behind an abandoned bowling alley. It was a route that cut her walk home in half, but it was also a blind spot, a place where no teachers watched, where no security cameras recorded. A moment later, Silas saw Trent's white Silverado roll out of the parking lot, but it wasn't heading toward the wealthy suburbs where Trent lived. It was creeping slowly in the direction of that alley. Colton was in the passenger seat, smirking. Another girl, a vicious cheerleader named Sarah, sat in the back with her phone already out. A cold knot formed in Silas's empty stomach. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to look away, to stay invisible. Involvement meant police. Police meant questions. Questions meant getting pulled back into the system, back to group homes, back to foster parents with heavy hands and locked bedroom doors. Look away, his mind hissed. It's none of your business, Ghost. Stay invisible. Stay safe. But as he watched that truck turn down the access road, positioning itself to block the opposite end of the alley, a memory flashed unbidden in his mind. He remembered his younger sister, Emma, remembered her crying in a dark hallway while their foster father advanced on them with his belt unbuckled. Remembered being 12 years old and too small to stop it, too weak to protect her. Emma had died 2 years ago. Pneumonia, they said. But Silas knew the truth. She had died because the system had broken her, because no one had been strong enough to stand between her and the monsters. Silas closed his book, slipped it carefully into his threadbare backpack, stood up, and started walking toward that alley. He didn't have a plan, didn't have a weapon. All he had was a sickening realization that if he didn't walk down that alley right now, whatever happened to that girl would be carved into his conscience forever. He had failed Emma. He wouldn't fail again. The alley behind the old bowling alley smelled of rotting cardboard and stale urine. By the time Silas slipped quietly around the corner, keeping his back pressed against the warm, rough brick wall, the confrontation was already escalating. Trent had parked the Silverado diagonally, completely blocking Quinn's path. He was leaning against the grill, arms crossed, wearing that cruel, entitled smile. Colton stood a few feet away, cracking his knuckles. A cliché intimidation tactic, but effective given his size. Sarah was leaning out the back window, phone held up, recording everything. "I don't get it, Quinn," Trent was saying, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. "I invite you to the lake house this weekend. I offer to introduce you to people who actually matter in this dust bowl of a town. and you treat me like trash. Do you know who my father is? Quinn's voice was surprisingly steady, though Silas could see her hands trembling where they gripped her backpack straps. I don't care who your father is, Trent. Move the truck. Let me pass. Or what Colton sneered, stepping closer. You going to call your trailer park family? You think because you wear dirty leather, you're tough? Quinn took a step back. Her eyes darted around looking for an escape route. There wasn't one. You have no idea what you're messing with, she warned softly. It wasn't an empty threat. There was chilling certainty in her voice. But Trent and Colton were blinded by their own arrogance, by their assumption that money and size made them untouchable. Grab her bag, Trent commanded lazily. Let's see what she's so defensive about. Colton lunged forward. Quinn tried to dodge, but Colton was fast. He grabbed the strap of her backpack, yanking her forward violently. She stumbled, falling hard onto the unforgiving asphalt. Her knees and palms scraped raw on the rough surface. Her leather jacket spilled from her arms. Colton kicked it away into a dirty puddle like it was garbage. Trent laughed. Not so tough now, are we? That's when Silas stepped out of the shadows. Hey. His voice cracked slightly on the word. He cleared his throat, finding volume. Hey. Three pairs of eyes turned to stare at the scrawny, disheveled teenager emerging from the deeper shadows of the alley. Silas's clothes were ragged, his shoes held together by duct tape, but his fists were clenched at his sides, and his eyes, those old observant eyes, were locked on Trent with absolute focus. Leave her alone, Silas said. His voice was surprisingly steady now. Clear. He stepped directly between Quinn and the two much larger boys. Trent stared at him for a long moment, then burst into harsh, mocking laughter. Are you kidding me? Is this a joke? Who the hell is this homeless rat? Just let her walk away, Silas said quietly, keeping his gaze locked on Trent. You don't want to do this. Colton stepped up, towering over Silas by a good 6 inches and outweighing him by at least 80 pounds. Listen to me, garbage. The contempt dripped from every word. Walk away right now or I'm going to break your jaw. From behind, Quinn's voice came out frantic. Don't. They'll kill you. Just go. Please. Silas ignored her. He looked up at Colton's face, saw the cruelty there, the absolute certainty that he could hurt this smaller boy without consequence. I'm not leaving, Silas said simply. Colton threw the first punch. It was a heavy looping right hook. Telegraphed and arrogant, Silas saw it coming and managed to duck. The fist whistled past his ear, close enough that he felt the displacement of air. On pure instinct, Silas retaliated, threw a desperate wild punch that connected squarely with Colton's nose. There was a satisfying crunch, cartilage giving way. Colton stumbled backward, blood instantly spurting over his lips and down his chin. For a split second, there was dead silence in that alley. Everyone frozen in shock. Colton touched his nose, looked at the blood on his fingers. His eyes went wide, not with pain, with pure homicidal rage. You're dead, he roared. He tackled Silas with the full force of his linebacker training, drove his shoulder into Silas's chest, and slammed him against the brick wall. The breath exploded from Silas's lungs in a painful whoosh. Stars burst across his vision. Before he could recover, before he could even attempt to defend himself, Colton threw him to the ground. Then the beating began. It wasn't a fight. There was no back and forth, no give and take. It was an execution. Colton kicked Silas in the ribs with heavy boots. Once, twice, 3 times. Silas heard something crack inside his chest, felt blinding, searing pain shoot through his torso like lightning. He curled into a fetal position, desperately trying to protect his head and vital organs. Get him up, Trent yelled, the rich boy's veneer of calm completely shattered by the sight of blood. His voice pitched high with adrenaline. Trent grabbed Silas by his ragged shirt, hauling him to his knees, then punched him squarely in the face. Silas's vision exploded into white stars. He tasted copper and salt, blood from his nose pouring down his throat. Stop! Stop it, Quinn screamed. She lunged at Trent, clawing at his face, trying to pull him away. But Trent shoved her roughly back to the asphalt. Stay down, bitch, Trent snarled. Silas felt consciousness slipping away. The pain was an ocean pulling him under dark waves. He felt another boot catch him in the stomach, forcing him to violently retch. Nothing came up. His stomach was empty, had been empty for 2 days. He was bleeding from a gash above his eye. His nose was shattered. Breathing felt like swallowing broken glass. But as he lay there, his blood pooling on the dirty asphalt, mixing with oil stains and grime, he saw Quinn scramble toward her, dropped leather jacket. She didn't reach for her phone. She reached into the lining of the jacket and pulled out a small, heavy black object, a distress beacon, a specialized emergency radio. She pressed a button on it, her hands shaking violently, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Silas's mangled body. Trent saw the device. Panic finally pierced his arrogance. Colton, let's go. Leave the trash. We're out of here. Now, Colton delivered one final vicious kick to Silas's side, then sprinted to the truck. Tires squealed against pavement. Rubber burning. The white Silverado reversed wildly out of the alley and sped away, engine roaring. The alley fell silent, save for the sound of Silas's ragged, bubbling breaths. Quinn crawled over to him. Her hands were covered in his blood as she gently touched his face. Hey, look at me. She was sobbing now, her tough exterior completely shattered. Why did you do that? Why did you do that for me? Silas tried to speak, tried to tell her it was okay, that he'd do it again, but all that came out was a wet, choking cough. His eyes rolled back. Darkness pulled at him, greedy, insistent. The last thing he heard before the blackness completely swallowed him wasn't the wail of police sirens, wasn't the screech of an ambulance. It was a low, distant rumble, a vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city, a sound like a thunderstorm rolling across asphalt. The unmistakable roar of multiple Harley-Davidson engines pushed hard, coming fast. Then nothing. The first thing Silas registered was the smell. It wasn't the sterile chemical stench of a county hospital. It smelled of rich tobacco, worn leather, stale beer, and underneath it all, the sharp bite of antiseptic. He tried to open his eyes, but his right eye was swollen completely shut. Through the narrow slit of his left eye, the world was a blurry, dim haze, and he realized he was lying on a surprisingly comfortable leather sofa. He was shirtless. His ribs were tightly bound in thick white bandages. An IV needle was taped securely into his left arm, feeding him clear fluids from a bag hanging on a metal stand. He's coming around. The voice was like gravel being crushed under a boot. Deep, resonant, entirely lacking in warmth. Silas tried to sit up. A massive hand pressed gently but firmly against his uninjured shoulder, pinning him down. Easy, kid. You've got 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, a fractured orbital bone, and internal bruising that looks like you got hit by a freight train. You move too fast, you're going to tear something important. Silas blinked, his vision slowly clearing. The man standing over him was a giant, easily 6'4", built like a brick wall. He had a thick gray and black beard and arms completely covered in intricate faded tattoos. He wore a heavy black leather vest, a cut they called it. On the back, though, Silas couldn't see it from this angle, would be the full patch, the insignia. But on the front breast, Silas could clearly read the rocker patch, President, Bakersfield. This was Garrett Reeves, Quinn's father, president of the Bakersfield charter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Silas glanced around the room. It was massive, like a converted warehouse. There was a long wooden bar in the background, a pool table, several motorcycles parked in the corner, their chrome gleaming under dim overhead lights. Men in similar leather cuts were moving around quietly, talking in low voices. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, controlled violence barely held in check. This was the clubhouse, the inner sanctum of one of the most dangerous organizations in California. Where Silas croaked, his throat felt like Sandpaper. Where am I? You're safe, Garrett said, pulling up a heavy wooden chair and sitting beside the sofa. The chair groaned under his weight. My name is Garrett, that girl you took a beating for in the alley. That's my daughter, Quinn. Silas swallowed hard, wincing at the pain in his jaw. Is she, is she okay? Garrett's hard eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, an imperceptible shift that spoke volumes. She's fine. Bruised knees, bruised ego. Thanks to you. Garrett leaned forward, resting his massive elbows on his knees. I've got a private doctor who handles our occupational hazards. He patched you up, said if you'd taken one more kick to the spleen, you'd be in a morgue right now instead of on my couch. Silas looked down at his bandaged chest. Why am I here? Why not a hospital? Garrett's expression didn't change. Hospitals ask questions. Hospitals call the police. The police file reports. Reports mean paperwork. And I don't like paperwork when it comes to people putting their hands on my family. The implication hung in the air. Heavy, terrifying. Garrett wasn't keeping Silas out of the hospital just for his benefit. Garrett wanted to handle Trent and Colton entirely off the grid. Outside the law, outside any system that might show them mercy. They're just kids, Silas whispered instinctively, recoiling from the dark path he sensed this was taking. Stupid, rich kids who made a mistake. Garrett let out a short, humorless laugh. Kid out here, there's no such thing as just kids. There are predators and there is prey. Those boys decided to play predator with the wrong bloodline. Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out Silas's battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. He tossed it gently onto the sofa beside Silas's leg. Quinn told me everything, said some homeless ghost stepped out of the shadows and threw himself to the wolves so she could hit the panic button. Garrett leaned closer. The smell of danger rolling off him was suffocating. I had my boys do some digging while you were unconscious. Silas Kane. No family, no address. Ran away from a group home in Fresno 2 years ago. You've been living in a rusted-out Ford behind the train yard. You literally have nothing. You are nobody. Silas felt a flush of shame mixed with the physical pain. I know. Shut up and listen, Garrett snapped. Not in anger, but with absolute authority. I'm not insulting you. I'm stating facts. You have nothing. No reason to care about the world because the world certainly doesn't care about you. Yet you threw your life away for my daughter, a girl you don't even know. Silas looked away, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't watch it happen. Not again. Garrett studied him for a long, silent minute. The silence in the clubhouse seemed to deepen, as if the other men in the room were collectively holding their breath, waiting for their president's verdict. In my world, Garrett finally said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble, a debt of blood is the only currency that matters. You bled for my blood. That means I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Silas protested weakly. Just let me heal up and I'll go back to the yards. Garrett stood up, towering over Silas. The look in his eyes was absolute, unyielding. The yards are gone, kid. I had my boys tow that piece of junk Ford to the scrap heap 3 hours ago. Panic flared in Silas's chest. What? Why, that was my home. It was a metal coffin, Garrett corrected coldly. You don't sleep in the dirt anymore. You saved a Hell's Angel's daughter. You think I'm going to let the guy who saved my little girl sleep in the mud like a dog? The club would lose every ounce of respect we have. Garrett reached out and tapped the leather of his cut right over his heart. You're under my roof now. You heal up here. You eat at my table. And when you're back on your feet, we're going to have a long talk about your future. Before Silas could protest, before he could process what was happening, the heavy metal door at the far end of the clubhouse slammed open. 2 massive bikers walked in, their faces grim. Between them, struggling weakly, bleeding from his nose and mouth, was Colton Mercer. His expensive clothes were torn, his tough guy facade completely gone, replaced by raw animal terror. Garrett didn't even look back at the door. He kept his eyes locked on Silas. Rest up, kid, Garrett said softly. a terrifying, predatory smile spreading across his bearded face. "The doctor will be back to check on you in a few hours. I have some business to attend to. We're going to teach the rich boys of Bakersfield a lesson about consequences." Garrett turned and walked toward a back room, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete floor. The two bikers dragged Colton after him. The boy was crying now, begging, "Please, I didn't know who she was. I swear to God I didn't know." The soundproof door closed behind them with a heavy thud, but it couldn't entirely mask the sounds that followed. The raw, unadulterated screams of someone learning what real fear felt like. Silas lay on that leather sofa staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding against his broken ribs. He had stepped into that alley to save a girl from a fire, but now he realized with cold, shivering dread that he had just been pulled straight into a different kind of hell, one where debts were paid in blood, where justice had nothing to do with courts or laws, where survival meant accepting protection from men who answered to no authority but their own. Quinn appeared at his side. She pulled up the chair her father had vacated and sat down gently. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was resolute. "You didn't have to do it," she said quietly. "I had the beacon. The club would have been there in 3 minutes." 3 minutes is a long time when you're on the ground," Silas rasped. Quinn reached out and rested her hand over his. The gesture was simple, but in that touch, something profound passed between them. An understanding. Two people who lived on opposite ends of the spectrum, finding common ground in the chaos. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's ever done that for me before." Silas closed his eyes. The exhaustion was overwhelming. The pain medication in the IV was pulling him back towards sleep. But before the darkness took him again, he heard Quinn's voice. Soft, fierce. "My dad's going to take care of you, I promise. You're family now." Family, the word echoed in Silas's fading consciousness. He had lost his family, his sister, his childhood, everything. But maybe, just maybe, in the most unlikely place imaginable, he had found something to replace it. Not a home built on blood relation, but a home built on blood spilled, on sacrifice, on stepping into the fire when every instinct screamed to run. As sleep finally claimed him, Silas Kane, the invisible boy who had lived as a ghost for 2 years, began his transformation into something else entirely, into someone who mattered, someone who belonged, someone whose name would be spoken with respect in the darkest corners of Bakersfield. The ghost was born in that alley, but he would be forged in the fires of the Hells Angels clubhouse, and nothing would ever be the same. The first week passed in a haze of pain and medication. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting to heal from the savage beating. But even in sleep, there was no peace. The nightmares came every night without fail. He would dream of the alley, of Colton's boot slamming into his ribs, of the taste of his own blood. But worse than those memories were the older ones that the beating had dredged up from the depths. He dreamed of Emma, his little sister, 12 years old with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. He dreamed of the night their foster father had come into her room, of her screams, of Silas being too small, too weak, too late to stop what happened. He would wake gasping, his broken ribs screaming in protest, sweat soaking the sheets. And every time Quinn would be there, she had taken to sleeping in a chair beside the sofa wrapped in a blanket. The moment Silas woke, she would be at his side with water, with quiet words, with a presence that said, "You're not alone anymore." The private doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s named Doc Stevens, came by twice daily to check Silas's progress, changed his bandages, adjusted his pain medication. Doc never asked questions, never made small talk, just did his job with the practiced efficiency of someone who had patched up broken bodies for decades without involving authorities. By the end of the second week, Silas could sit up without wanting to scream. By the third week, he could walk slowly around the clubhouse, one hand pressed against his ribs for support. The swelling in his face had gone down enough that he could see out of both eyes again. The purple bruises were fading to a sickly yellow-green. It was during the third week that Quinn really started talking to him. Not just the surface level questions about pain or comfort. Real conversation, deep conversation. The kind that happens between two people who have seen each other's vulnerabilities and decided that trust was worth the risk. They were sitting in a corner of the clubhouse one afternoon. Silas on the sofa, Quinn cross-legged on the floor beside him. The other club members moved around them like water around stones, giving them space but always aware, always protective. "Why did you do it?" Quinn asked suddenly, her voice quiet but intense. "Everyone at that school just walks past me. They pretend I don't exist because they're terrified of my dad. And they pretend you don't exist because you don't wear the right clothes or live in the right neighborhood. So why did you step in?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. He stared at his hands, at the scars on his knuckles from 2 years of street survival. "When you're invisible," he finally said, "you see everything. I saw how Trent looked at you. It wasn't about liking you. It was about owning you, controlling you." He paused, swallowing hard against the emotion rising in his throat. "I had a sister once, Emma. Somebody tried to own her too. Tried to control her in ways that destroyed her. I was too small to stop it back then. 12 years old and worthless." Quinn's eyes filled with tears. "What happened to her?" "She died 2 years ago. Pneumonia officially. But really she died because the system broke her. Because no one was strong enough to stand between her and the monsters." Silas finally looked up, meeting Quinn's gaze. "I guess I decided I wasn't going to be too small this time. Wasn't going to walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference." Quinn reached out and took his hand. Her grip was tight, fierce. "You made a difference. You saved me. And whether you know it or not, you saved yourself too." From across the room, Garrett watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a recognition perhaps, of two wounded souls finding each other in the wreckage. By the fourth week, Silas was mobile enough that Garrett decided it was time for him to start earning his keep. The conversation happened one morning over breakfast. The clubhouse kitchen was surprisingly well stocked. Eggs and bacon and coffee prepared by one of the old ladies, the wives and girlfriends of Patch It members who kept the domestic side of the club running. "You want to eat my food," Garrett said, tossing a pair of grease-stained coveralls onto the table in front of Silas. "You work. Go see Ironside in the garage. Tell him you're the new shop rat." Silas picked up the coveralls. They were too big for his thin frame, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't call me sir. I'm not your commanding officer. You call me Garrett, or you call me Prez if we're in church." "Understood. Understood." The garage was a separate building attached to the main clubhouse. A massive space filled with motorcycles in various states of assembly and repair. The smell of motor oil and metal and welding sparks hung heavy in the air. It was a smell that Silas found oddly comforting. Honest work. Tangible results. Ironside was exactly what his nickname suggested. A man built like a tank. Easily 6'6" and probably close to 300 pounds of solid muscle. His arms were covered in faded military tattoos. His face was scarred from old fights. He spoke in grunts and single-syllable responses, communicating more through looks and gestures than words. When Silas approached him that first morning, coveralls hanging off his frame like a tent, Ironside looked him up and down with an expression that clearly said, "This scrawny kid is going to be useless." "Garrett sent me," Silas said. "Said to tell you I'm the new shop rat." Ironside grunted, pointed at a broom leaning against the wall. "Sweep." For the next 3 days, that's all Silas did. Swept the concrete floors, organized tools that had been scattered across workbenches, hauled away metal scraps and old parts. It was menial work. The kind of work designed to test whether someone would quit or prove their worth through persistence. Silas didn't quit. On the fourth day, Ironside tossed him a wrench. "Come here." Silas approached the motorcycle Ironside was working on, a 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. The engine was completely disassembled parts laid out in precise order on a drop cloth. "Watch," Ironside commanded. And Silas watched. He watched Ironside's massive hands move with surprising delicacy, adjusting carburetors, checking valve clearances, torquing bolts to exact specifications. Ironside didn't explain what he was doing, didn't offer running commentary. He just worked and expected Silas to absorb the knowledge through observation. It was a teaching method perfectly suited to Silas's strengths. 2 years on the streets had made him an expert at silent observation, at pattern recognition, at learning through watching rather than asking. By the end of the 5th week, Silas wasn't just sweeping anymore. He was handing Ironside tools before the big man asked for them, anticipating the next step in a repair sequence, cleaning parts with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that came from understanding that precision mattered. By the 6th week, Ironside trusted him enough to let him work on simple tasks unsupervised. Oil changes, brake pad replacements, chain adjustments. Silas approached each job with the same intensity he had once applied to survival, because in a way, this was survival, proving his worth, earning his place. The other club members started to notice, started to see that the scrawny homeless kid wasn't just some charity case Garrett had taken pity on. He was actually useful, actually skilled. The nickname Ghost, which had started as a reference to his former invisible life on the streets, began to shift in meaning. It became a term of respect, a recognition that Silas moved through the garage like a phantom, quiet, efficient, always there when needed but never in the way. One afternoon during the 7th week, Garrett himself came into the garage. He watched Silas work for several minutes without saying anything. Watched the boy's careful hands adjusting a carburetor, with Ironside standing nearby, arms crossed, nodding approval. "He's good," Ironside said. First words he had spoken directly to Garrett in Silas's presence. Doesn't ask stupid questions. Watches, learns, works hard. Garrett walked over to Silas. The boy looked up, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. "You settling in okay?" Ghost Silas nodded. "Yes, thank you for everything." Garrett's expression softened slightly. "You don't thank me for giving you what you earned. You bled for my family. You work hard for your place here. That's not charity. That's honor." He paused, then added, "Quinn tells me you still have nightmares, that you wake up screaming some nights." Silas looked away embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I'm disturbing people. Don't apologize." Garrett's voice was firm but not unkind. "You went through hell. Brain doesn't just forget that overnight. But you're safe here. You understand that's safe?" Silas met Garrett's eyes. "I'm starting to." "Good." Garrett clapped a heavy hand on Silas's shoulder. "Keep working. Keep learning. When you're ready, we'll talk about getting you a GED. Maybe community college down the line. You've got a brain. Be ashamed to waste it." As Garrett walked away, Silas felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Hope. For the first time in 2 years, he could imagine a future that extended beyond the next meal, beyond the next safe place to sleep. But that fragile hope was about to be tested in ways Silas couldn't have anticipated. It started in the 9th week, a Friday night. Silas was in his room, a small space upstairs in the clubhouse that Garrett had designated as his permanent quarters. It wasn't much, a bed, a dresser, a small desk, but it was his, the first space that had belonged to him since before the foster system. He was lying on the bed reading his Count of Monte Cristo for probably the 20th time when he heard the commotion downstairs, shouting, boots pounding on concrete, the sharp bark of Garrett's voice cutting through the chaos. Silas got up, moving quickly down the stairs. The main room of the clubhouse was packed with angry armed men. Garrett stood at the center, his face a mask of controlled fury. Quinn was there too, her eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" Silas asked, approaching Quinn. "The shop," she whispered. "Someone burned it down. Our custom motorcycle shop downtown. It's gone. Complete loss." Silas felt his stomach drop. The shop was the club's primary legitimate business, their main source of legal income. Losing it was a massive financial blow. Over the next 48 hours, things got worse. Three of the club's prospect members, younger guys trying to earn their patches, were ambushed while riding down Highway 99. Someone had fired at them from an overpass with a high-powered rifle, shot out their tires, sent their bikes careening off the road into the desert scrub. All three survived, but barely. Two had compound fractures. One had a punctured lung. The clubhouse went into immediate lockdown. Armed guards were posted on the roof around the clock. Windows were reinforced. Assault rifles that had been hidden in secret caches were pulled out and distributed. The atmosphere shifted from relaxed brotherhood to a war camp on high alert. Garrett called a church meeting. The inner circle of fully patched members gathered around a long wooden table in a private room. Silas wasn't invited. He was still just a kid, not a member. But he stood near the door with the other prospects and hangers-on listening. "This isn't the Mayans," Garrett's voice rumbled through the door. "This isn't the Vagos. This is too clean, too professional, too tactical." One of the lieutenants spoke up. "Could be the Mongols moving into our territory." "Negative." Garrett sounded certain. "I've got good intel on the Mongols. They're nowhere near Bakersfield. This is something else. Someone hired professional hitters, ghost operators who know how to make it look like a gang war." "But who?" another voice asked. "Who has the resources and the motive?" "That's what we need to find out," Garrett said, "before they hit us again." Silas listened to the debate swirl back and forth. The club members threw out theories. Rival gangs, disgruntled former members, even cartel elements moving up from Mexico. But none of it felt right to Silas. None of it made sense with the pattern of attacks. That night, unable to sleep, Silas went for a walk around the perimeter of the clubhouse compound. It was after midnight. The guards on the roof tracked his movement, but didn't stop him. They knew who he was now. Ghost, the kid who had bled for the president's daughter. He was walking along the fence line, hands in his pockets, when he noticed something. A vehicle parked down the block. A black SUV with heavily tinted windows. No license plates. It had been there when he started his walk 20 minutes ago, and it was still there now. Engine off. No movement. Silas's street instincts kicked in immediately. He knew surveillance when he saw it. He had spent 2 years avoiding it. He moved casually, not looking directly at the vehicle, and circled back toward the clubhouse. But his mind was racing. Over the next 2 days, Silas watched. The black SUV appeared at different times, different positions, always within sight of the clubhouse, always with tinted windows that prevented him from seeing who was inside. But there was always someone there, watching, waiting. On the third day, Silas made a decision. He didn't tell Garrett, didn't ask permission. He simply acted. He waited until 3 in the morning. The SUV was parked 2 blocks down on a side street with minimal lighting. Silas slipped out of the clubhouse through a back exit the guards couldn't see. He moved through the shadows the way he had learned to move during his homeless years. Silent, invisible, a ghost in truth. When he reached the SUV, he dropped to the ground and crawled underneath. His heart was pounding so hard, he was certain the driver would hear it. But the person inside didn't move, didn't react. Silas pulled out the cheap GPS tracker he had bought online with money Garrett had given him for personal supplies. $20 for a device that could change everything. He attached it to the undercarriage with the magnetic mount, making sure it was secure and hidden. Then he crawled back out and disappeared into the darkness. For the next week, Silas tracked that SUV on his phone, watched its movements, its patterns, and what he discovered made his blood run cold. The vehicle went to a luxury hotel downtown, the Grand Regent, one of the most expensive hotels in Bakersfield. And it didn't just park in the lot. It went to a private underground garage, the kind reserved for penthouse guests. Silas did some research, called the hotel from a burner phone, pretending to be interested in booking the penthouse. The receptionist cheerfully informed him that the penthouse was currently occupied by a long-term guest, unavailable for the next 2 months. Who owns this hotel? Silas had asked casually. The Grand Region is owned by Ashford Development Corporation, the receptionist had replied proudly. Ashford, Nathaniel Ashford, Trent's father, the billionaire real estate developer whose son had helped beat Silas half to death in that alley. The same man Garrett had extorted after the attack, forced to sign over business interests and pay protection money. The same man who had every reason in the world to want revenge. Silas sat in his room staring at the tracker data on his phone screen. The pieces clicked together in his mind like the gears of one of Ironside's motorcycles. Nathaniel Ashford was too wealthy, too connected, too proud to accept what had happened. He couldn't go to the police. Garrett had too many people in the local precincts. Any report would get back to the club before the ink dried. So Nathaniel had done what rich men do when legal options fail. He had bought a different kind of justice, hired mercenaries, professional soldiers who didn't care about motorcycle clubs or street rules, who saw this as just another contract, another payday. And if Silas didn't act, those mercenaries were going to kill everyone in this clubhouse, everyone who had given him shelter, food, purpose, family. He waited until the next church meeting, until Garrett and the lieutenants were gathered around that table, still debating theories about who was attacking them. Then Silas walked to the door and knocked. The conversation inside stopped. There was a long pause. Then Garrett's voice. Come. Silas pushed open the door, walked into the room. Every patch member turned to stare at him. This was sacred space. Church was for full members only. A prospect interrupting could be grounds for serious punishment. But Silas wasn't afraid. He looked directly at Garrett. I know who's attacking us. I know where they are. And I know how to stop them. The room erupted in angry voices. Who does this kid think he is? Get him out of here. This is church business. Garrett held up one massive hand. Silence fell immediately. He leaned back in his chair, studying Silas with those hard, unreadable eyes. You've got 30 seconds, Ghost. Make them count. Silas pulled out his phone, set it on the table, pulled up the GPS tracking app, and turned it so everyone could see. It's Nathaniel Ashford, Trent's father. He hired professional contractors, military guys. They've been surveilling the clubhouse for a week. How do you know this? One of the lieutenants demanded. Because I tracked them. Silas's voice was steady, confident. I noticed a black SUV doing reconnaissance. No plates, tinted windows. I planted a GPS tracker on it while the driver was inside. Tracked it to the Grand Region Hotel, penthouse level. That hotel is owned by Ashford Development. Garrett stood up slowly, walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Silas. You did this yourself. Didn't ask permission. Didn't wait for orders, yes. Silas met his gaze without flinching. Because by the time I asked for permission, they might have hit us again. People might have died. I couldn't let that happen. Garrett stared at him for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across his bearded face. He turned to look at his lieutenants. You hardened outlaws didn't spot the tail, but the 16-year-old kid who used to sleep in a junkyard Ford did. He looked back at Silas. Why didn't you bring this to me immediately when you confirmed the location? Because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I brought it to you, Silas said. I needed to verify the hotel ownership, track the pattern, make sure I wasn't wrong. If I came to you with half information, you might have acted on it and walked into a trap. Garrett's smile widened. He's thinking tactically. He turned to Ironside, who was sitting quietly in the corner. What do you think? The massive man grunted. Kids got balls and brains, more than some of our patched members. Garrett turned back to Silas. You said you know how to stop them. Elaborate, Silas took a breath. The Grand Region has armed security in the lobby, cameras everywhere. The penthouse elevator requires a key card. If you go in through the front, you'll have cops there in 3 minutes, and Ashford will have time to barricade himself. But there's another way. He paused, remembering. I used to sleep on the steam grates behind that hotel. 3 months back when I was first on the streets, the kitchen staff props open a service door with a cinder block so they can sneak out for smoke breaks. That door leads to Freyite elevators. Those elevators don't need key cards. They go straight to the roof access, right above the penthouse. The room was dead silent now, every man staring at Silas with a mixture of respect and disbelief. You're telling me, Garrett said slowly, that you know a way into one of the most secure buildings in Bakersfield because you used to be homeless? Yes, and you're offering to lead us in. Yes, Silas's voice didn't waver. You gave me a family when I had nothing. You gave me purpose. Now I protect that family. That's what family does. Garrett walked back to his chair, sat down heavily, looked around at his lieutenants. Thoughts. Use him, one said immediately. The kid's intel is solid, and if he's willing to guide us in, we'd be fools not to take the advantage. He's not even a prospect, another protested. This is club business. He bled for the president's daughter, a third countered. That makes it his business. Garrett held up his hand again. Silence. He looked at Silas. You lead us to the elevator, Ghost. Once we're in the shaft, you vanish. You go back to the street, stay invisible until you hear from me. I'm not putting you in a firefight. Understood? Silas wanted to argue, wanted to insist on seeing it through, but he recognized the tone in Garrett's voice. This wasn't negotiable. Understood. Good. Garrett stood up. Meeting adjourned. We move tonight. 2 a.m. Ghost, you're with Ironside. He'll make sure you're equipped and ready. As the room cleared out, Garrett put a hand on Silas's shoulder. Stopped him before he could leave. That took guts, kid. Coming in here, interrupting church. Could have gone very badly for you. I know, but it didn't. You know why? Because the intel was good. No. Garrett's grip tightened slightly. Because you've proven yourself, not through words or bravado, through action, through loyalty. You're not just some kid we're sheltering anymore, Ghost. You're becoming one of us. And that means when you speak, we listen. He paused, his expression growing serious. But it also means you're in deeper now. You understand that once we move on, Ashford, once we take down his mercenaries, there's no going back. You'll be tied to this club, to this life, forever. Silas thought about the Ford Bronco, about the train yards, about 2 years of being invisible, of being nothing. I don't want to go back. Then welcome to the war, Ghost. Garrett released his shoulder. Let's go show these rich boys that money can't buy what we have. Can't buy loyalty, can't buy family, and sure as hell can't buy their way out of hell. 2 a.m. came fast. 3 unmarked black panel vans sat idling in the clubhouse garage engines, rumbling low like sleeping predators. Silas stood near the lead van, dressed in dark clothes Ironside had given him. Black jeans, black hoodie, dark sneakers that made no sound on concrete. He looked like what he had been for 2 years, a shadow, a ghost. Around him, the Hells Angels geared up with military precision. Kevlar vests strapped over leather cuts. AR-15 rifles checked and loaded. Shotguns racked. Faces painted with black grease to kill the shine of skin under streetlights. These men had transformed from bikers into something else. A paramilitary strike team that would terrify any conventional force. Garrett emerged from the armory fully kitted out. He looked at Silas for a long moment, then walked over. You sure about this Ghost last chance to stay behind? No one will think less of you, I'm sure. Silas's voice was steady. I got you into this. I need to see it through. You didn't get us into anything. Garrett's tone was firm. Nathaniel Ashford made his choice when he came after my family. You just gave us the tools to end it. There's a difference. He reached out and squeezed Silas's shoulder. Remember, you get us to the elevator, then you disappear. I find out you went up to the penthouse after I told you to leave. We're going to have a serious conversation about following orders. Clear, clear. Garrett nodded, then turned to address his crew. Listen up. Ghost leads until we're in the shaft. Follow his directions exactly. He knows this route better than any of us. Once we're inside, he's out. Ironside, you make sure he gets back to the van safe. Ironside grunted his acknowledgement. His massive hand rested on Silas's shoulder, protective, almost paternal. Quinn appeared from the clubhouse. Her eyes found Silas immediately. She walked over, ignoring the armed men around them. "Be careful," she said quietly. "I will." She reached out and hugged him. Tight, fierce. "Come back," she whispered against his ear. "You're family now. Family comes back." Silas returned the embrace. "I promise." Then it was time. The men loaded into the vans. Silas rode in the lead vehicle with Garrett and 4 others. The streets of Bakersfield were empty at this hour. Quiet. The vans moved through the darkness like sharks through deep water. Silent, purposeful, deadly. They parked 2 blocks from the Grand Regent Hotel. The building rose into the night sky like a monument to wealth and arrogance. Glass and steel reflecting the few streetlights that still burned. Silas led the team through the shadows, moving with the confident silence of someone who had survived 2 years invisible in this city. He brought them to the alley behind the hotel. The smell hit him immediately. Rotting garbage, stale bleach. Memories of cold nights and hunger flooded back. But he pushed them down, focused on the mission. There, he pointed to a heavy steel service door. Behind those dumpsters should still be propped open. Should one of the bikers whispered. "It was propped open every night for 3 months when I lived here," Silas replied. "Kitchen staff hasn't changed. I checked last week. They still smoke out here on breaks." They moved to the door. Just as Silas had said, a chipped concrete cinder block wedged it open by 2 inches. Silas slipped through the gap first. The others followed, their larger frames barely fitting. Inside was a narrow corridor illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of industrial kitchen, stainless steel and sanitizer. Silas led them through the maze, past prep stations, past walk-in freezers. His memory was perfect. Every turn, every hallway. Finally, they reached the freight elevator. Silas pressed the call button. The wait felt eternal. The only sound was the heavy breathing of armed men and the distant hum of kitchen equipment. Then with a dull ding, the door slid open. Garrett looked at Silas. "Good work, Ghost. Now you leave." But Silas didn't move. Something in his chest tightened. A realization. These men were walking into danger because of information he had provided. If something went wrong, if his intel was incomplete, they could die, and he would have sent them. "I'm coming with you," Silas said. "No," Garrett's voice was flat, final. "You need me." Silas spoke quickly before Garrett could shut him down. "I know the layout of that penthouse. I studied the hotel blueprints online. I know where the panic room is, where the security controls are. I can help." Garrett stared at him. The other men shifted uncomfortably. This was a direct challenge to the president's authority. "Kid, you're pushing it, I know. But I'm right. You need me up there." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett's expression shifted, not to anger, to something else. Recognition, maybe. Of himself at a younger age. Of the kind of courage that couldn't be taught or faked. "You stay behind me. You don't invite unless I tell you to. And when this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about what it means to follow orders." "Yes, sir. I mean, yes, Prez." Garrett almost smiled. "Get in the elevator, Ghost." They rode up in silence. The freight elevator was large enough to hold them all, but barely. Silas stood at the back, surrounded by men twice his size, carrying enough firepower to start a small war. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, from anticipation. The elevator stopped at the roof level. The doors opened onto darkness and cold night air. They emerged onto a concrete expanse dotted with HVAC units and satellite equipment. Garrett signaled for formation. The team spread out, moving to the edges. Below them, visible through a large reinforced skylight, was the penthouse. Silas could see movement inside. Men in tactical gear. Nathaniel Ashford pacing near the windows, a crystal glass in his hand. And sitting calmly on a white leather sofa, cleaning a weapon, was a man who could only be the mercenary commander. Cold, professional, dangerous. Garrett turned to two of his men. Razor, brick, breaching charges on my mark. The two bikers moved to the skylights and terrace doors, placed small explosive charges with practiced efficiency. Everyone else took cover behind the HVAC units. Garrett looked at Silas. When this goes loud, you stay down. Understand? Silas nodded. Breach, Garrett commanded. The night exploded. Two simultaneous detonations shattered the reinforced glass into a million cascading diamonds. The concussive wave rolled across the roof. Before the smoke could clear, the Hells Angels poured through the openings like a flood of violence. Silas watched from his position. Saw Nathaniel Ashford knocked off his feet by the shockwave. Saw the mercenary commander roll off the sofa with impressive speed, raising a suppressed pistol. Two shots. One sparked off Razor's Kevlar vest, knocking the big man back a step. The other went wide. But the mercenary was outnumbered 5-1. Ironside moved with surprising speed for his size, swinging his shotgun like a club. The stock connected with the mercenary's wrist. Bones shattered. The pistol clattered to the marble floor. Before the man could draw his combat knife, two more angels tackled him. The beating was swift and brutal. Three other mercenaries had been positioned around the penthouse. They went down almost as fast. These were professionals, yes, but they had been hired for surveillance and intimidation, not for fighting a motorcycle club that had home field advantage and nothing to lose. Within 40 seconds, the penthouse was secure. 5 mercenaries unconscious or subdued. Nathaniel Ashford crawling backward across imported Italian marble, his expensive suit covered in ash and broken glass. And Garrett Reeves walking through the smoke boots, crunching, looking like the wrath of God made flesh. Silas followed at a distance, staying behind Garrett as ordered. But his eyes were scanning the room, taking in details. The office door slightly ajar, the safe visible behind a painting, the leather-bound ledger sitting on the desk. "Hello," Nathaniel Garrett rumbled. His voice filled the space. He didn't raise his weapon, didn't need to. His presence was weapon enough. Nathaniel was hyperventilating, hands raised, tears streaming down his face. "Harper, please, I can double whatever you want. 5 million, 10 million. Just name your price." Garrett pulled a hunting knife from his belt. The serrated edge caught the light. "You wealthy types never learn. You think money is the ultimate power, that you can buy the Reaper when he comes knocking." A door opened. A bedroom. Trent Ashford stepped out, trembling, clutching a baseball bat he was too terrified to swing. He looked at his father, saw the man who had seemed omnipotent, reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor, begging for his life. The illusion shattered. The boy's face crumbled. Dad Trent whimpered. Garrett glanced at him, then back to Nathaniel. "Didn't send him to Switzerland like I told you. Hid him in your glass castle instead." He shook his head slowly. A man who can't protect his own blood without hiring ghosts isn't much of a man at all. That's when Silas made his move. Not toward Nathaniel, toward the office. He slipped through the door while everyone's attention was on the confrontation. Found what he was looking for immediately. The ledger. Thick, black leather, locked, but the key was in the desk drawer. He grabbed it and returned to the main room. Garrett had his knife at Nathaniel's throat. Not cutting, just pressed there. A promise of what could happen, but Silas saw the tension in Garrett's shoulders. The hesitation. This wasn't what Garrett wanted. This was rage looking for an outlet. "Prez," Silas called out. Every head turned. Garrett looked at him surprised. "I thought I told you to stay back." "You did, but I found something." Silas held up the ledger. Nathaniel's eyes went wide with panic. He gasped, a strangled sound of a man watching his empire crumble. Silas walked forward, opened the ledger to a random page. "I can't read all the financial stuff, but I know what hidden accounts look like. Offshore banks, shell corporations, bribes to city council members, payoffs to people who should be investigating him instead of protecting him." He flipped more pages. And this. Looks like he's been laundering money for some very bad people. Cartels, if I'm reading these notes right. Using his real estate developments to clean dirty cash. Garrett took the ledger, flipped through it himself. His expression darkened. Then slowly a terrible smile spread across his face. He looked down at Nathaniel. Well, looks like my ghost just found the keys to your entire kingdom. Garrett crouched, bringing his face inches from Nathaniel's. I'm not gonna kill you. Death is too easy. You'd become a martyr. Rich people would rally around your memory. No, we're doing something much worse. He tapped the ledger against Nathaniel's cheek. Tomorrow morning, you call your lawyers. You sign over your primary development company, your commercial holdings. This hotel, all of it goes into an offshore trust managed by my people. If you refuse, this ledger goes to the FBI, the IRS, and every cartel in Mexico whose money you've been skimming. Nathaniel was sobbing now. You're taking everything. I'll have nothing. Exactly, Garrett said. His voice was cold, empty of mercy. You're going to know what it's like to be nothing, to be invisible, to hope someone throws you scraps. And if I ever see your son in my town again, he glanced at Trent, who flinched violently. I won't use a hammer next time. There won't be a next time. Garrett stood, looked at Silas. The respect in his eyes was profound. Let's go home, Ghost. We're done here. But Silas wasn't done. He walked over to where Nathaniel was curled on the floor. The billionaire looked up at him through tear-filled eyes, recognized the homeless kid from the alley, the one his son and Colton had beaten half to death. You tried to own people, Silas said quietly. Your son tried to own Quinn because he thought money gave him that right. You tried to destroy Garrett's club because you thought wealth made you untouchable. But you can't own what you don't understand. You can't buy loyalty, can't buy family, can't buy the kind of strength that comes from having nothing and surviving anyway. He paused. I was invisible for 2 years. I know what it's like to be nothing. Now you're going to learn, and maybe if you're lucky, it'll teach you something. Silas turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, Nathaniel Ashford lay broken. Not physically, but in every way that mattered to a man who had measured his worth in dollars and square footage. The descent from the penthouse was quiet. The mercenaries were bound and gagged, loaded into the freight elevator. They wouldn't be going to police. Garrett had other plans for them, plans that involved long drives into the Mojave Desert and shallow graves in places where no one would ever find them. By the time the vans pulled back into the clubhouse compound, the sun was beginning to rise. Blood-red lights spilled over the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the asphalt in shades of violence and victory. The heavy gates slammed shut behind them, sealing them safely in their world. Silas climbed out of the van. His legs felt like lead. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him hollow and exhausted. He started walking toward the clubhouse when the doors flew open. Quinn ran out, ignored everyone else, slammed into Silas and wrapped her arms around his neck. He stiffened in surprise, then slowly returned the embrace. You're an idiot, she whispered fiercely. Voice trembling. You were supposed to stay at the elevator. I couldn't, he said softly. I had to see it through. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were wet. You're not allowed to scare me like that. You understand? You're family. Family doesn't get to just disappear. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. From the clubhouse steps, Ironside watched, lit a thick cigar, exhaled smoke. Kids got more heart than half the patched members I've ridden with, he rumbled to no one in particular. Didn't just guide us. Found the kill switch. Took down a billionaire without firing a shot. Garrett walked up beside him, nodded slowly. He's earned what comes next. The rest of that day passed in exhausted celebration. The threat was eliminated. The club was safe. Better than safe. They were sitting on a multi-million-dollar real estate empire that Nathaniel would be forced to sign over. The brotherhood was intact, stronger even. But Silas barely participated. He slept most of the day. Deep, dreamless sleep. the first truly peaceful rest he'd had since the nightmares began. When he finally woke, it was early evening. The clubhouse was alive with music and voices. A party in full swing. He showered, changed into clean clothes, walked downstairs. The main room was packed. Club members, old ladies, friends and allies, beer flowing, the smell of barbecue from the pit outside, laughter and loud conversations. Silas made his way to the bar, grabbed a soda, found a quiet corner to sit and watch. He still felt like an observer sometimes, a guest at someone else's celebration, but that feeling was fading, replaced slowly by something that felt like belonging. The music cut dead, sudden silence, heavy and expectant. Silas looked up, saw the men stepping back, the old ladies moving to the walls. Garrett walked to the center of the room, stood at the head of the massive carved wooden church table. Ghost Garrett's voice echoed, front and center. Silas's stomach dropped. He set down his drink, walked slowly through the parted crowd, every eye on him. When he stopped in front of Garrett, he felt incredibly small, young, out of place. But Garrett's expression was stern, serious, presidential. 3 months ago, he began his voice carrying absolute authority. You were a ghost, lived in dirt, ate from dumpsters. The world looked right through you like you didn't exist. Silas stood silent, listening. But when my daughter was backed into a corner by predators, you didn't look away. You stepped into the fire. You took a beating that would have killed most grown men, just to buy her time. Garrett paused, let the words settle. When this club was threatened by men with endless money and professional training, you didn't run. You used the invisible world you came from to tear down a king. You bled for us. You protected us. Garrett slowly reached under the table, pulled out a heavy garment, held it up, a black leather cut, not a full patch. Silas was too young for that, but it was clearly customized, crafted specifically. On the back, arched across the shoulders, were the words, Property of Bakersfield. On the front, over the left breast, a small white patch embroidered with perfect precision. Ghost. The room was absolutely silent, not even breathing. Out here, Garrett continued, his voice thick with emotion. Blood isn't about who birthed you. Blood is about who bleeds for you. You don't sleep in the dirt anymore, son. You sleep under my roof. You eat at my table, and you wear my colors. He stepped forward, extended the cut. Silas's hands shook as he reached out, took the heavy leather. It smelled like everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. Safety, purpose, home. He slipped it over his shoulders. It was slightly too big. He'd grow into it, but it felt like armor, like a second skin, like proof that he mattered. Garrett extended his massive scarred hand. Welcome to the family, Ghost. Silas gripped that hand, felt the crushing strength, the absolute certainty. Thank you, Prez. The clubhouse erupted. Men roared approval. Glasses slammed on tables. Ironside stepped forward and wrapped Silas in a suffocating embrace that nearly cracked his ribs all over again. Quinn pushed through the crowd, grabbed his hand, squeezed it so tight it hurt. But Garrett wasn't finished. He raised his hand. Silence fell again immediately. There's more, he said. He looked at Silas. The garage is yours to run. Ironside reports to you now. You've proven you understand the work. You've earned that authority. Silas blinked, stunned. Thank you. You'll also be getting your Garrett continued. Club's paying for it. After that community college, mechanical engineering program, you're 16. You've got a future ahead of you. We're making sure you have the tools to build it right. Silas felt tears prickling his eyes. He blinked them back hard, tried to speak, couldn't. In this room upstairs, Garrett gestured vaguely toward the second floor. It's not temporary. It's yours. Forever. This is your home. For as long as you want it. The emotions were too much. Silas felt them crashing over him like waves. Gratitude, belonging, hope. Things he thought had died with Emma in that foster home. Garrett's expression softened. He stepped closer, put both hands on Silas's shoulders, looked him directly in the eyes. I had a son once. Lost him to the streets when he was about your age. Drugs, violence, things I couldn't protect him from because I was too busy building this empire to notice he was drowning. His voice cracked slightly. First time Silas had ever heard Garrett show that kind of vulnerability. I couldn't save him, but I can save you. You remind me what I should have been. What a father should do. Protect, guide, give purpose instead of just demanding loyalty. A single tear rolled down Garrett's weathered face. You're not replacing him. Nobody could, but you're family now. Real family. And I'm not losing you the way I lost him. Silas couldn't hold it back anymore. He stepped forward and hugged Garrett. The president stiffened for just a moment, then wrapped his massive arms around the boy, held him tight. The room erupted again, cheering, whistling, a family welcoming one of their own. When they finally separated, Quinn was there. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were bright. Told you, she said. You're not invisible anymore. Silas looked around at the faces surrounding him. Men who would kill for him now, who would die for him. Because he was one of them. Not through blood, through something stronger, through sacrifice, through proving that loyalty mattered more than lineage. I came to save you, he said to Quinn, his voice barely audible over the celebration. But somehow you all saved me instead. That's what family does, Quinn replied. We save each other. The party continued late into the night. Silas sat at the bar with his leather cut on, feeling the weight of it, the responsibility, the belonging. Ironside sat beside him smoking a cigar, teaching him the proper way to break in new leather. Other members came by, shook his hand, clapped his shoulder, called him Ghost with respect instead of pity. Much later, after most people had filtered out or passed out, Silas stood outside under the stars. The Bakersfield night was cool now, quiet. He looked at the leather cut in his hands, traced the ghost patch with one finger. 3 months ago, he had been nobody, a street kid with nothing, invisible. Today, he was Ghost, protected member of the Hells Angels, a boy with a future, with education ahead, with family, with purpose. He thought about the Count of Monte Cristo, about Edmond Dantes being thrown into the darkest pit and clawing his way back to matter, to have power, to achieve justice. Silas had lived that story, not through revenge, through something better, through finding people who saw value where the world saw trash. The door opened behind him. Garrett stepped out, stood beside him in comfortable silence for a moment. You okay, Ghost? Yeah. Silas nodded. Better than okay. Good. Garrett lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke into the night. Tomorrow we start on your GED prep. Ironside's already got a curriculum planned. He used to be a teacher before he joined the club, believe it or not. Silas smiled. I believe it. He's got the whole silent wisdom thing down. Garrett chuckled. You did good tonight, not just with the raid, with Nathaniel. You could have let me kill him, would have been justified, but you chose the harder path. Took everything that mattered to him without spilling blood. That takes wisdom most men twice your age don't have. I learned it from the streets, Silas said. Death is easy. Survival is hard. Making someone live with their choices. That's the real punishment. Exactly. Garrett put a hand on Silas's shoulder. You're gonna go far, kid, in this life, in any life, because you understand what most people never learn. That real strength isn't about size or money or weapons. It's about standing up when every instinct tells you to run. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's about being visible when the world wants you invisible. Silas looked up at the man who had become more than a savior, more than a president, a father figure, a mentor, a proof that family could be built instead of born. Thank you, Prez, for everything. Thank your own courage, Ghost. I just gave you the opportunity. You did the rest. They stood together under the stars. The president and the ghost. The outlaw and the street kid. The broken man who had lost a choson and the broken boy who had lost everything. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to be whole again. Inside the clubhouse, Quinn watched through the window, smiled, turned away to give them their moment. The invisible boy had found his family. The ghost had found his home. And the Hells Angels had found something they didn't know they were missing. Proof that loyalty and love could transcend blood. That the bonds forged in fire were stronger than any born in comfort. Silas Kane had died in that alley behind the bowling alley. The terrified, invisible runaway was gone forever. In his place stood Ghost, a young man with tactical brilliance, street-born wisdom, and the backing of the most dangerous motorcycle club in California. He was no longer a shadow haunting the edges of society. He was a legend in the making. Living proof that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a man with a gun or a billionaire with a checkbook. It's a boy with nothing to lose who finally finds something worth living for. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, one truth became absolutely clear. The club had repaid their debt to Ghost, not just with revenge against his attackers, not just with shelter and food, but with something far more valuable. They had given him purpose, identity, a future. They had given him proof that he mattered, that his life had value, that somewhere in this brutal world there was a place he belonged. Silas looked down at the leather cut in his hands one more time. Then he put it on, felt its weight settle across his shoulders like a mantle, like destiny. He had saved a Hell's Angel's daughter, and in return the angels had saved him right back. That was the true repayment, the one that would echo through the rest of his life. The knowledge that he wasn't invisible anymore, that he never would be again, because Ghost had finally come home.